Here we'll be talking about really the Muslim experience in Central Asia, South Asia, going through Southeast Asia. I mean, we are biting more than we can chew because of time. Now, you cannot understand Islam in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia without taking into account Baghdad, Iraq, and how Iraq served as a gateway for the Muslim armies, because since the Battle of Hadisiyah, in which the Persians were defeated by the Muslim armies, Muslim armies, and of course Saddam Hussein, unfortunately, tried to use that as an occasion of Arab nationalism, when in actual fact, really, it was Muslim success, because those Arabs were Arabs, ethnically Arabs, but they didn't see themselves as Arabs defeating Persians. They were doing it fi sabilillah. They were fighting as Muslims. Again, that's very important concepts. They didn't have this Arab nationalism that developed in the 19th, 20th century. They were going out there as Muslims, because the very people they were fighting in Makkah were Arabs, like them. So they were not fighting because they were Arabs. They were fighting because they were Muslims. So when the Iraqi Muslims, together with the other Arabs from Yemen and other places in Arabia, went to Persia and they defeated the Persians, those Persians were fighting not as Persians. They were fighting as defenders of the Sassanid Empire, which was built on Zoroastrianism. So you had the battle of two religions, Islam, the emerging young religion, and Zoroastrianism, the long-established religion of the Persian people and neighboring peoples who embraced that religion. Now, that's the background against which we can understand the spread of Islam. As the Muslim armies move into Iraq, and then they push into what we now call Persia, you see gradually Islam moving into what we now call Afghanistan. Because through the Khyber Pass, Islam will now come into what we now call Pakistan and India, because the Indian Muslims, of course, you know that Pakistan is a recent creation. You know that. I mean, some Pakistanis don't like to hear that, but Pakistan is a recent creation. I mean, places we call Pakistan are provinces of the old British Empire, which was part of the Mughal Empire. I mean, the British defeated the Mughals and took over the land and created their own British India. Now, when the Muslims came in, there was no Pakistan. There was Hindustan, land of the Indians, that was known to the Arabs, even before Islam. And there are Indian words, Hindi, or now we call Urdu words, even in the Quran itself. So, I mean, you have the Arabs had knowledge, geographic knowledge of India before Islam. So when the Muslim armies move in to Afghanistan, and those Arab armies that came in, of course, were able to establish Islamic presence in these areas where Zoroastrianism, the Nestorian Christianity, existed. And then the Muslims now gradually move into Hindu-Buddhist territory, India and portion of Central Asia, where Buddhism has spread into China. So Islam now began to compete with Nestorianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Maniism, and Zoroastrianism. So you have this rich religious landscape into which Islam was moving in. So people we now call Pashtun, or many of us now, because of British influence, call them Pathans. Even South Asians themselves call these people Pathans, because the British conditioned them, they say Pathans. But the people who are called Pathans in the literature don't like to call themselves Pathans. That's the name from outside. They call themselves Pashtun. Now, these people from the northwest frontier province of British India, now Pakistan, and then Afghanistan, now celebrate the fact that they celebrate the exploits of people like Khalid bin Walid, who was a major Muslim warrior Khalid is named after that over here. His namesake, Khalid bin Walid. So, I mean, these Muslim armies that came across the borders of Iran and Afghanistan would, of course, cross through this Khyber Pass into India. And of course, this would give rise to the planting of Islam in northern India. And today you find the people who live in Pakistan and India who are Muslims can trace their roots to some of those soldiers who came from the Muslim armies. And you have major centers of learning, just like in West Africa, as we were talking about. You have towns that were created by Hindus many years ago, but you have new towns that were created by these Muslim armies and traders. Mansuria, Lucknow, and many others that you find in northern part of India. Now, this becomes very important in terms of the development of Islam in that part of the world. Now, of course, the Islam that came into the area would be the Islam that came overland. Just like in Africa again, Islam did not only come across the Sahara in the case of Africa, but Islam came across the Khyber Pass into northern. But then Islam also came by boat to India, because you have those Arabs who were traveling. Long before Islam, Arabs were traveling by boats along the quote-unquote Persian or Arabian Gulf. It's controversial. Some Arabs don't like the word Persian Gulf. So some of us call it the Islamic Gulf. So, I mean, like this way, in that region called the Persian Gulf, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Bahrain, and all that area, these people you have Arab tribes living in that region. And of course, many of them were involved in pearl fishing, trying to get pearls in that part of the world. Many of them were nomadic peoples. But with Islam, and even before Islam, the Greeks and the Romans knew the area. So, and the Persians, the Iranians, civilization, the Sassanid. Now, Arab traders traveled by boat to India. And of course, in that way, you had connections. The same thing will happen in the case of Indonesia and China. Those Arab traders will go to those parts of the world. Now, the point I want to make with regard to India is that Indian civilization is very old, thousands of years. And of course, when the Muslims came into the area, other civilizations and cultures have also visited that area. I mean, they didn't stay long, but they came in. People like Alexander the Great is well known. They came into the area, northern India, not southern India, northern India. So when the Muslims came into the area, they started from northern India. And of course, Muslim power did not spread to the whole subcontinent of India. It was basically a northern experience. And of course, there were Muslims who moved south. But if you look at today, even in India today, you'll find that the majority of the Muslims are concentrated in certain geographic zones. And this is likely because of the pattern of penetration of Islam in that part of the world. And of course, you have a history of military forces. In this case, Muslim armies came, and they did conquer. But you have a big role for Muslim scholars and Muslim merchants, because they were into the spice trade. And the spice trade and all the other goodies that came out of India went west, because India became a very important thoroughfare in that trade between the east and the west, north and the south. And of course, Indian knowledge was also transmitted to West Asia, not only in the field of medicine, astronomy, but in mathematics. And that's one of the reasons why today we borrow from the Indians what is called the Arabic zero. It came from India, but it was popularized in the West by the Muslims. So it's now identified as the Arabic numerals. because the Arabic numerals carry to the West the concept of a zero. We wouldn't have computers today if that civilizational knowledge was not borrowed from the Arabs by way of the Indians. You see, so that is the part of the knowledge transfer that took place as a result of this dialogue between the Islamic civilization on the one hand and the Hindu civilization in India on the other. Now, of course, as in Africa, as in other parts of the world where Islam went, cities and towns emerge and you begin to have dynasties, one coming in only to be replaced by others. The same kind of sectarianism, Sunnis versus Shiites, also played out. And even within the Shiite groups, you will have subdivisions between these different groups, to the point that you have Ismaili groups developing also. So the expansion of these doctrinal groups that started in West Asia, in Iraq, in Syria, being played out in Afghanistan and in the Indian subcontinent. And today, if you look at the geography of religion in India and Pakistan, you will see that historically, all the factions that existed in the Muslim world of the Mediterranean have their representatives and their partisans in India. And this is true not only in terms of the Shiite-Sunni divide, which is very pronounced in that part of the world, more so than in sub-Saharan Africa, but it is also evident in terms of the Sufi tradition. And of course, as I said to you, what Hampateba said with regard to Islam in Africa, using the metaphor of the river, the bed of the river influencing the water, the same thing happened in India, because many of the practices that existed pre-Islam carry over into the new religion. And of course, just like in North Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa, you have saint veneration among the Sufis. Some of these groups in India have big tombs for the saints, the awliya, who are the heads of these various Sufi groups. The other point that needs to be borne in mind is the fact that competition between the various dynasties existing contemporaneously or intergenerationally also affected Islam in the subcontinent. This was played out between the Umayyad and the Abbasid. It was also played out in the ruling dynasties that came into being in India, to the point that one of the dynasties would build the Taj Mahal, for example, to the point that it becomes a legacy of that dynasty. And then, of course, you have another set of rulers who will be instrumental in the planting of the seeds for the emergence of what we now call Urdu as a language. Because Urdu and Hindi, which is the language of the non-Muslim Indian, have many words in common, virtually the same language, but they have different words that reflect their religious consciousness. Because those who are Muslims use certain kind of words, which the others, by virtue of their Hinduism, will not use. I mean, I guess you find to some extent something like this in Arabic between the Christian Arabs and the Muslim Arabs. I mean, for example, among the Christian Arabs, they will never name their son Muhammad. You will never see a Christian Arab called Muhammad, but you will have Christian Arabs whose names are Ismail, Isa, Ibrahim, Abdullah, even Abdullah, they may call their kids, Abdullah, but like they will not call them Muhammad, you see. So you can see that these are some of the subtleties that exist in terms of cultures and civilization. And this happened also in India with regard to the coming of the Turkish, Persian, Arab influence in Indian culture. And those people who previously were Hindus became Muslim.